Hey there.
Hey there, Larry.
How are you?
Great. Yourself?
I'm good. You've been growing your beard in? Did you have that last week?
Nope.
And maybe I didn't notice really, but thinking about a mask. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's
I was
looking
cheap
good.
for a little while. You can get away with it, now that we've got the. No, I'm in winter hibernation mode now.
Gotcha. Well, what is it? November is like no shave November. That's usually when we're supposed to, grow a beard or a mustache or whatever.
That's
So,
right. Yep.
yeah. Hey, how are you?
I'm doing great. Things are good. Yeah, I'm staying busy in a different way than normal, but no, I've got no complaints here. I love the background, by the way. This is
Thank you.
a couple things that you've done, and it looks very. I don't know where you are. You could be in a studio. You could be in your basement. I don't know.
Hang on.
Oh.
Right? You can.
Perfect.
I'm in the loft of my of my house. So yeah, the what do they say? The beauty of special effects, right? The magic of Hollywood.
Magic of Hollywood. Yep, that's great.
Yeah. So I'm not in Hollywood. I'm in Fortville, Indiana, which is some people might consider like the furthest thing from Hollywood. But
it's funny.
it's funny you say you're busy, and a lot of people would think, man, you talk to somebody these days and it's like, I don't know, I'm sitting around twiddling my thumbs. I don't know what to do. But everybody I talk to, they're finding a way to stay busy. It's either with, being creative in a new way for what they already do, or they're taking on a new venture, right? They're heading in a new direction. And so I don't know, I might be jumping the gun. That might be, even something that you're doing. But that's why we're here, is I want to find out more about you and, of course, your relationship with the Indianapolis Chamber Orchestra and Marion Philharmonic and all of that. So, yeah. So, Matt or Matthew, what do you prefer?
I've been going by Matthew for about 20 years, but my wife, friends still call me Matt. So just Matthew is usually my,
okay,
default. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I want to respect that. That's why I ask, right? It's like you don't want to just assume. So, Matthew Kramer, welcome to my podcast. I'm glad to have you here.
It's a pleasure to join you, Larry.
Thanks. So, we've worked together a couple of times in professional settings, but I think we actually go back. Both of us were students at Butler simultaneously, and I cannot for the life of me remember what year or years. Do you recall when that was?
Yeah, it would have been in the late 90s. I graduated with my undergrad in 99. Then I stuck around an extra year to do some conducting studies while I kind of figured out where I was going. So,
well, that was it. Yeah, I came back in 2000 to finish my master's. So that's when we would have crossed paths. How about that? 20 years we've known each other, right?
It's fascinating. And, the old saying, the time does fly. But I just, now that I'm back in Indianapolis and on campus, as much as campus has changed, I mean, I'm really almost walking 20 years in the past when I'm stepping around everywhere on there. So, no, it absolutely does seem like yesterday in many respects.
Stan DeRusha was still there at that point. Were you studying conducting with him?
I kind of, fell into that. We say it's the conducting bug, but as a violin major, studying excerpts and, the repertoire and everything, it just something that was fascinating about conducting, and it wasn't just the standing up there waving your hands around kind of thing. It was just, not being a pianist, I was only used to one line at a time. And the fact that there's this whole apparatus, this gigantic instrument, that which we were all a part of playing in orchestra. I just fell in love with the repertoire more than the concertos and the sonatas that I was practicing. So yeah, went up to him and just said, I know there's no undergraduate program in conducting, but I'm really interested in this. And he had a few other people who were doing independent studies with him. So I had about 2.5 years of just, private lessons, and it really just kind of like go to his office for an hour and just talk, kind of thing. And nothing really formal, but that's how I got my foot in the door.
I had forgotten that you were a violin major, or maybe I just thought you were, conducting the whole time. I appreciated, one thing I appreciated about Stan's orchestras was he never shied away from challenging repertoire.
Very true.
And he did a great job of programming, but he also did a great job of teaching us how to be professional musicians. I mean, and there's some harsh things, conductors sometimes say, and I've not played under you enough to know if you've got anything harsh to say. Well, hopefully I won't find out anytime soon. But, I mean, it's and of course it's a different thing conducting a student group rather than a professional group, but I always appreciated what he did for me is in terms of how to prepare and how to comport myself in an orchestral setting. So, so okay, you finished with a degree in a master's in conducting, is that right?
No, actually, both my degrees are in violin performance. This was something I felt very strongly about. I mean, to connect the dots here, after that extra year of conducting studies, I had a few options that I was considering, but my number one option was Rice University with Larry Ratcliffe, and I really had my eyes set on that. But he only takes one student every year, and I was the runner-up, so that fell through, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but made this great connection. Larry Shapiro, my violin teacher, connected me with Philip Reuter, who was the former concertmaster of Cincinnati Symphony for about 25 years. And he had relocated out to Reno, Nevada, of all the places, to start up a master's program in orchestral career studies. So I went out there as his assistant. He was conducting the orchestra, but he didn't really want to do it. So he let me conduct like almost every concert, which was great. And I practiced all the excerpts, getting ready for an orchestral audition. So at that time, I think my violin playing was at the best that it would be, including even now. And I was ready to take these auditions. And it turns out that at the same time I was doing conducting, went to Aspen, got into a couple auditions. And the very first audition I had after graduating with my master's was a conducting audition, and that's what I won. So I became a conductor.
Well, and it doesn't always work that way, right? I mean, it sometimes is a much longer path to that, yep, right? And multiple auditions, multiple opportunities, and where people say you've got to pay your dues, and I know I'm still paying my dues in a lot of respects. But so what was that audition that you won? What was that?
That was with the Akron Symphony in Akron, Ohio. A really fine orchestra. Cleveland Orchestra is just up the road, so a lot of the musicians are either on faculty at either Oberlin or Cleveland Institute or University of Akron, or they're master's students, artist diploma students that have stuck around in the area. So it was a really great group. And I was in charge of the Akron Youth Symphony. I was the associate conductor there with the Akron Symphony. So I thought, again, to your point of, paying your dues here, I thought, wow, I got my first gig. This is great, and now I was already, arrogantly looking down the road of what was the next step. And I ended up staying there 5 years. I did numerous auditions during that process. So you get up on the first leg of the ladder, and it doesn't guarantee you're going to make that next step anytime soon. So it is a constant fight in our field, and all of the arts, for that, to move up the career ladder, the food chain necessarily. But it was a good first gig because it was remains a very fine orchestra, and a lot of great things happened for me in Akron. I met my future wife, in Akron, and I still go back there because family and everything. So that was the first gig, and I was green as could be, and I got a lot of lumps in the process.
Is your wife a violinist or a trumpet player by any chance?
She's a veterinary technician, and now she's working at my son's school district as a teaching assistant. So she has no connection to music, which is perfect for me. And she's also, since I know very little about animals and education, she's been very wonderful for me in that regard too. So yeah, no connection professionally.
Yeah, I bring that up because, I'm a trumpet player married to a violinist, Dan Gosling, trumpet player married to a violinist. And, it seems to be kind of a pattern. I don't know if our mentalities, our Myers-Briggs personality traits line up, or maybe they're just total opposites. But so Akron.
On almost every orchestra that I've been to is that, about anywhere between a quarter to a third of the orchestra is married to each other. The Virginia Symphony, where I went to next after that, was, I would say, easily 1/3 of the orchestra. And I think, a part of this too, yes, personalities, but also when you win a position in an orchestra, you're moving, most likely to an area where you don't have any familiarity with anybody. And the people that you end up spending the most time with are your colleagues. So it makes sense to me that, as a violinist, you're looking across the section in the cello section at the new cellist that just arrived, or vice versa. And, many relationships start that way.
Well, and that's exactly what happened. Trumpet players have a few more rests than violin players. So, I'm sitting there scoping out and seeing who's sitting up there in that violin section. And I'm like, to my second trumpet player, I'm like, hey, Sean, what's her name? He's like, I don't know. And, so it took me a while to figure out who she was, but 24 years we've been together now, or married 24 years.
That's marvelous. Congratulations.
Thank you. So Virginia, where in Virginia was that symphony, or is it located?
Virginia Symphony, Norfolk, Virginia Beach. Joanne Filletta had been there as music director for almost 30 years. She's just recently stepped down, and so that was 2 seasons there with the Virginia Symphony, and that was really going from the shallow end of a regional orchestra that only had a certain number of weeks a year to a full-time orchestra with a 40-week season. The workload quadrupled, or sixfold even. The amount of work that I was responsible for. I conducted all the Pops concerts, all the education concerts, which were extensive. Got 2 subscription concerts a year on top of it. So, here I thought, well, 5 years in the business, I think I know what I'm doing now. It opened up a whole new layer of green that I was exposing to everybody. So that, was really where I really kind of felt like I was at a professional pace, just, working harder, studying harder, responsible for more programs. And that was then, after 2 years, right at the financial crisis in 2008. And so everybody was reeling, with trying to rein in costs and try to take a better, picture, or take a better look at what the scope of things were going to be going forward. And just at that time, then the Buffalo Philharmonic position came open, where Joanne is also music director. So that was the segue up to Buffalo after that.
So as an associate conductor or assistant conductor, whatever the title is, do you actually get to, you said you were responsible for programs, but does that also mean programming? Are you able to actually choose the repertoire for those?
Yes, excellent question, because it all depends on where it is. There's assistant conductor, associate conductor, resident conductor, and they're all just titles. But, for really large orchestras, friends of mine that, worked for Cleveland Orchestra or New York Philharmonic as assistant conductors, they're really just cover conductors. They're sitting in the hall with the music director or with the guest conductors, and they've studied the score. They're out there listening for balance, and they're the backup just in case something does happen. And occasionally it does happen. I had to step in for Joanne Filletta in Virginia for a program, really a few hours before the concert. So it does happen occasionally, but you're really just there, as a safety net and for the ears in the hall. But for both the Virginia Symphony and Buffalo Philharmonic, I was very much on the podium, at least 40 to 45% of the time. More concerts a year than Joanne. If you take a look at all of the education concerts, all of the family Pops, my own subscription concerts, the run out concerts, the sold services, all the different things that, an orchestra with that size budget, up to $10 million, they do. It's not just sitting in your hall and playing 4 repeats of the same program, and that's your weekly schedule. So in my capacity, both in Virginia and in the 5 years I spent in Buffalo, I very much programmed all of the education family and my own classical concerts. There was some input there, obviously, on who the soloist would be, and I wasn't allowed to do Rite of Spring or Guru Leader or massive things. So I obviously had to fill in a lot of holes in the programming, but I did very much program all of the concerts that I was responsible for there.
I think about backup quarterback, right? You're there, like you say, you're sitting in the hall, studying the score, following through rehearsals and everything, just in case, right? Just in case. And you said that happened, but you may not know. It's like, well, this happens so infrequently, but then, was there any kind of adrenaline or well, not panic? I think you're way too composed to be to panic, but what's that feeling like when you're like, okay, Matthew, you're on?
It's kind of like panic, actually. Yeah, we're talking 10 years ago too, actually close to 14 years ago. And so, in that particular case, it was a flight delay. And the first half of the program was something like Copland music for movies. And then this world premiere of an English horn concerto by Kenneth Fuchs. And so, I was there for the week, and I knew, and the second half was Beethoven 5, which even 14 years ago I could do cold. And so, there's a flight delay from New York down to Norfolk. And so you're going to have to go on, bring your tux, and, just going through my head, do I know this? I never had a rehearsal with the guest soloists, even though I was there in the hall. Do I know all of the you're thinking just very mathematically at this point, like where are the places that I need to really worry myself, the tempo changes and dramatic places that we really need a lot of focus. So deep breaths, some kind of Zen meditation backstage, everybody telling me I was going to be fine. And I did it. The first half went off great. I was actually looking forward to the second half. And then Joanne comes in through the stage door. Her flight had arrived, so she goes out and does Beethoven 5, which was, at that point, it was fine. I'll go to the restaurant and have a martini and eat dinner at that point. So
well, it's easy. I think easier to get up and do that when you've got a really fine band in front of you, right? I mean, it's not like you're having to get up and they can't play by themselves. I mean, in many respects, I think that's one of the videos that comes to mind. And I know Bernstein and Vienna had a really special relationship, but there's that video of him, one of the Mozart symphonies, I think, where he's just got his hands in his pockets and, and the group's just playing and he's just kind of giving, these facial, these looks, these little winks and such to the group. I mean, he didn't need to be there.
Yeah.
I mean, not to conduct, but of course, I know another big thing that you guys is you unify. That's kind of your job, is to unify the idea, the style, right?
Absolutely.
You're not just a metronome. Well,
exactly.
I know in some cases you might think you need to take that role, but yeah, I mean, mostly it's that unification of style and the idea of how to approach the piece, right?
I would agree with that completely, and I still believe fervently in that if you don't come at it from the music perspective, you'll never be a successful conductor or or a musician or any just in general. That's what we have to keep our eyesight on. And I say that as a conductor because I mean, frankly, there are many people that I've known and that are in the field for all the wrong reasons. And it's because you're up there on the podium, you get the bow, your face is on the season brochure, but it's about the music. And what I find so fascinating for our patrons that come to the open rehearsals is they get to see the rehearsal process, which is critical, as we all know. Like that's where you put it together, because any fine band can sit down and play through a Mozart symphony. They'll play through it again, and the mistakes will be, 50%, if not more of them, will be corrected automatically by themselves. Musicians know exactly what they did wrong and don't need to be told unless there's an errant note in the part or something. But it's the unifying of the vision, because, I played in conductorless ensembles and it's fun, it's invigorating. But you're talking about 75, whatever the piece is, extremely talented and very well educated musicians with strong opinions about how this music should be played. And when you get into a situation, you played in chamber ensembles your whole life, as a string quartet player was my background, they can be contentious at times where you're arguing about tempi or phrasing or, who's flat and who's, it's when you're responsible for that singular vision, then you get a lot of the flack, pushed back, but at least, there's one perspective there. And if it doesn't, work out, you don't get invited back as a guest conductor or whatever. But that's the number one responsibility, is to have a vision for what it is that you're playing. And I'm talking not just about classical works, even in pops. Yeah. You get the drum kit in and the band can play just fine, but a conductor can really mess things up if they bring the group back in too early when there's a band out in back of you. You start the wrong tempo. There's a lot of things that a conductor can mess up, even when it seems like it's not possible to mess up something. I mean, a lot of responsibility in that regard.
I feel kind of the same way, sitting in the hot seat, the principal trumpet, because I can make or break, a phrase or a piece. But I love that pressure. I mean, there's something about it that, I think a lot of people would just freak out. And I'll admit that, like you admitted, you panic. I've panicked a few times, but less and less, as I get older, because I'm realizing, what? I don't have to strive for perfection. I just have to sound good. I have to play, and just worry about making music. And it's become so much easier to play when I take that focus, because mistakes happen.
Absolutely. And I agree with that sentiment completely. The sports analogies with, musicians are kind of tiresome, but, there's something that I've always appreciated, the fact that we don't hit our peak at 25. Our knees go out, and so what? We can keep playing, we can keep conducting. I mean, there's something to be said about, there actually is a lot to be said about experience and wisdom that comes with age, and having done, a piece several times. And, going back, and for me, I go back into my old scores and I see how I used to mark things. And, the ones that had the highlighters in them, from my early days are long gone. Those are in the trash can 10 years ago. But you come back to things and you have more insight because you've lived with them longer. And, to that point about pressure and nerves. And I mean, that's what I also thrive on. I mean, if somebody asks me if I get nervous, I mean, it's a different kind of nervous. If you've done your work, you've practiced, or you've studied, and you feel comfortable with where you are, it's a different kind of nerves. You don't lackadaisically walk out on stage and, all right, let's do this, and get it over with. But that's the thrill of what live performance really is. I think for us as musicians is to be there in that moment when the sound is created, and then just taking chances, in that moment.
Doc Severinsen, I remember him saying he still gets nerves when he walks on stage. And he said, of course, this was many years ago, he said, I realized, and he looked over like he was looking at his nerves and thought, it's a friend. I'm just going to welcome him onto stage with me, and I think, man, I wish I could be that, that nonchalant about it and just say, okay, they're there, let's go. Let's just, that they're going to be there. But yeah. Okay. So I'm going to edit that part out because I don't want people to know I'm nervous about stuff. So let's jump to an opening comes for music director for the Indianapolis Chamber Orchestra. How did you find out about that? And then what was the process for application, audition, and that sort of thing?
Yeah, the music director, and even for associate conductor, but particularly music director, the whole procedure is very elaborate and very long. I think it would surprise a lot of people. Of course, we knew this orchestra, back in our college days, and I think I counted 1.5 of my teachers played in the orchestra at one time, and 3 of them still do at this moment. So, we get our notifications. An orchestra can post League of American Orchestras, for example, and there are a couple other professional sites. So it's pretty apparent when jobs come open. I mean, you get 500 people apply for a job. I've loved chamber orchestra repertoire for 20 years. And even though I was working with and continue to work with large orchestras, I'm music director of 2 symphonic groups in addition to the chamber orchestra. I've loved this repertoire, because it's the orchestra of Mozart and Haydn. We could really, Bach. I love Bach. I love the Baroque era, but we can look at the modern orchestra as coming from Haydn and Mozart, obviously, and then Beethoven, certainly. So that's the heart of our repertoire in many respects. Even though large groups do it, you can do it very, very well. That's the Viennese classics are the composers that continue to resonate with me as a violinist and as a conductor. But even though in the 19th century the orchestra was getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, there's some great repertoire in the 19th century, but the 20th century is a treasure trove of incredible works for small orchestra. And I'm just convinced that composers came back to chamber orchestra because of the transparency, the intimacy, the concept of chamber music is evident in chamber orchestras, where really the musicians are listening to each other, and times where I just really feel like they've got this. They don't need me to do. It's just amazing to see the communication, which is oftentimes impossible in Mahler. To trust your ears in the back of the orchestra that you're even in the right place with the violins up in front of you because of the distance. That I find this repertoire to be so full of treasures that people have just not programmed enough or have not been heard enough, and that composers continually and contemporary composers come back to with this instrumentation. So I find no shortage of repertoire to program every year. I'm sitting on at least a dozen programs that I've been pushing off year after year after year, trying to get into the mix. And not just classical works. Since I've been with the chamber orchestra, we've done Kiss Me Kate in concert, great Cole Porter classic. We programmed for Bernstein, Trouble in Tahiti. We've got a number of commissions that we've worked. Every year has at least 2 commissions or at least 2 premieres of some kind or another. And in addition to the Contemporary Music Festival, we perform, I tabulated somewhere about 12 works by living composers we do every year, and we only have 7 subscription concerts. So I find the wealth of repertoire to be stimulating, and I'm constantly coming across pieces that I was unfamiliar with. There's just a lot of music out there.
Mm-hmm. I find it interesting thinking back to the very first orchestra concert I played at Butler. We did Beethoven 1 on the first half, Mahler 1 on the second half. Now, all these years later, I look at that and I think, why was there full orchestra out there for Beethoven?
Yeah.
Right. And I wonder, if Haydn or Mozart or Beethoven were to come back, well, Beethoven might appreciate the large orchestra. He could probably hear it, right, or feel it. But, for them to come back and think, this too much, this is just too much, 12 stands of first violins is too much. How about, 2 stands of everybody? So it'd be interesting to even see if a large symphonic orchestra take that kind of approach. And I remember when Gonzaga was with the ISO, I remember him scaling some of those things down, and rightly so. You mentioned living composers, and I don't know if Ligeti is still living, but he's a new composer, new to me at least, but some fantastic writing and really imaginative. Have you performed any of his works?
My first season, we did the Concerto Romanesque here of his, and that's more of the Bartokian Ligeti, and it's great, but it's a great, it's really an orchestral showpiece and very accessible from the audience. But I like his music a lot, and I've been trying to figure out ways to get it into the repertoire here. I just have to ease into it because it is extremely difficult to put together. Melodian is a piece that I have kind of scheduled here at some point to get in, and that's, you look at the score and the bars are kind of spilling over in places trying to get all the notes in, and it's difficult to rehearse. It takes a lot of time, in other words. So I still have on my list, that for the chamber orchestra. The violin concerto is terrific and extremely difficult. You got to find a violinist that can really play the heck out of it, and there are several who have mastered it, and I mean their fee is exorbitant, let's put it that way, and most of them are based in Europe. There are, let's see, a couple other pieces of his. His opera, the piece that Mysteries of the Macabre or something to that regard. Yeah, pretty wild. And there's a great kind of a viral Simon Rattle performance of it with Harrigan. Comes out and does it in crazy clothing and everything, and it's just really, really wild. Yeah. But we've done Berio with the chamber orchestra. We did, and he's another Italian modernist, contemporary of Ligeti. We did his renderings, which is the Schubert 10th Symphony, which was unfinished, and he filled in the blanks with his own music. So you get that kind of sound world. People who don't know these composers just think of Stanley Kubrick and the music of The Shining. As Berio and Ligeti was used as well. So that's very eerie modernist music, and I like that stuff, and I would perform more of it. But as a music director, you kind of have to temper how much new music you're doing and where you slip those pieces in, knowing that we're not San Francisco, we're not New York City, and that's not to say that my audience, I don't feel like our audiences would reject that. It's just there's a lot of new music we're talking about, and you want to kind of insert it into the season judiciously.
So that's actually where I was headed next regarding the community. How do you see the ICO's role in the Indianapolis or Indiana, the greater Indiana community?
Well, the chamber orchestra remains one of the most collaborative organizations in Central Indiana. We collaborate with just about every arts organization you can imagine, and symphonic choir to the violin competition, the American Pianist Association. Recent years, we've collaborated with the city of Indianapolis and the Sister Cities program, the Idle Jord. The list really goes on and on. And we were hired by these organizations, or we hire either soloists or choruses from other organizations. So there's a good chance, no matter what service you're talking about, performances in an ensemble, that you have musicians from the chamber orchestra in those ensembles, in the recording studios. Our musicians are really involved in teaching at local universities and private lessons. So that's kind of where I start with this. That's been long-standing for the chamber orchestra, is that we are collaborators, and we continue to do that. We're also the only professional chamber orchestra in the state, and we've had engagements outside of Central Indiana, performing in the recent years over in Richmond and over in Terre Haute, where we are every year, to the south and to the north as well. But our home base here it remains Indianapolis. One thing that we continue to work very hard at the Chamber Orchestra is getting our brand out there, and we continue to work to do a better job to build our audience, which is a struggle for any orchestra. But since we're one of two professional orchestras in the city, and the other one has a very, very large budget, it's always a struggle to again, to get our brand out there and to make people aware that we've been here for 35 plus years, and that we're playing great music that a lot of the other orchestras don't play, frankly, anywhere. You can hear music that's either commissioned by us or that just isn't in the repertoire. So that's where I think we have a special niche that we continue to fill.
Well, and you're doing something that the ISO is not doing right now, and that's maintaining a presence with either virtual, well, I guess they're all virtual performances at this point, but at least you're doing that. So kudos to you and the ICO for doing that.
Thank you.
Thinking about repertoire that you've programmed and that is coming up, pieces that really resonate with you, are there, and you can't wait for the audience to hear them, or that's already come and gone, that is there anything that stands out?
Yeah, several. It was it still is the big Beethoven year. I remember back in 2019, where seemingly everybody was complaining, oh great, more Beethoven. It's not every year that somebody, probably the most impactful composer in history, certainly if not the most popular, among the most popular, celebrates his 250th birthday. And then what happens? Pandemic, and now nobody's playing his music publicly. So we did get his 8th symphony in, and I adore the 8th symphony. I always can't figure out if it's the 7th or the 8th that I enjoy performing more. But we had Fidelio planned, and I really had my eyes set on that. Really a wonderful team of soloists, chorus put together. That was going to be our season finale last May. And, and in the early days of COVID, we were thinking, all right, well, we'll just postpone it a month. We'll do it in June, or can we do it in July? And how, none of us knew that this was going to stretch on as long as it has. So I do regret that, and we're going to have that again. At some point in future season, we'll be able to get back to that project. A number of commissions that I'm particularly thrilled with. Michael Torke's violin concerto. We were part of a consortium to commission Michael to write that for Tessa Lark, who's an Indianapolis favorite, silver medal of the violin competition several years ago. It's a bluegrass concerto with some Celtic influence, and it's a terrific piece. I mean, standing ovation afterwards. Tessa's, just the right soloist for that piece. And so I'm thrilled that the Chamber Orchestra's got his name attached to it, along with 8 other orchestras. I'm doing the piece again. It would have been this September, but I'm doing it with Arkansas Symphony 2022. So this is a piece that I think is going to stay in the repertoire. And so I'm thrilled we were part of it. James Aikman's Peacemakers, which I referenced earlier, that was already in the mix before I came on board, but that's what he calls a filmic oratorio, dedicated multiple movements to great peacemakers, Martin Luther King Jr., Robert Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, Gandhi, the list goes on. 9 movements with film to it, with 2 choruses, sitar player, mezzo soprano, piano solo, saxophone solo. I mean, it was just a huge, biggest piece of the Chamber Orchestra ever did. And it won us a regional Emmy for the documentary broadcast that we put together with WFYI for that. So that was another one.
Well, congratulations. I wasn't aware of that. That's fantastic.
Oh, thank you. That's, to my point that I continue to say that the Chamber Orchestra needs to do a better job of telling their stories, because we're getting a lot of accolades here. In fact, I mean, we're in the newest edition of Symphony Magazine, which is the quarterly magazine, the League of American Orchestras. We've been in there, several times in the last 5 years, and this one is about the Virginia Toolman commissions, which we were awarded for emerging women composers. We had a premiere of Chinwe Jen's work, which was written for us. So we're getting national recognition for what we're doing here, and the repertoire. That's there are pieces that don't seem like oh, well, why would that piece be? I mean, it's so traditional, like Beethoven 8, like I just mentioned. But those pieces are also very special to me. So it's not always the big pieces or the new pieces. There's a lot in all that we do that I can think back fondly and say that was a great concert. I'm proud of it.
And I agree. Years ago I would have said, oh, Mahler's my favorite composer. Just give me any symphony. And now I'm like, really enjoy playing Beethoven. And I've had students ask me why. It's just playing the same thing over and over. And I said, first of all, there's a challenge there in being really consistent with articulation and shaping, those notes to match the timpani, or, convincing the timpani player to match you on something. But then I also find so much joy in Beethoven, and so I've become really drawn to him. And speaking of Beethoven, I always found it funny that he's considered one of the finest opera composers, and all he wrote was Fidelio. but that's how genius it was, right? And it was so good.
Yeah. He wrote the same opera 3 times, the 3 different versions.
Right.
Or like, so he said it would have been easier to write an entirely new opera than to go back and revise Fidelio the 2 times that he did it. They're dramatically, one is dramatically different in conception. Very true.
Well, and of course, the trumpet players, we get 2 of our most famous audition calls from those pieces. So from those overtures. So, coming up, does it look like there's going to be a 21-22 season, do you think?
Definitely. We feel very optimistic about that. In fact, our plan is in January to return to Clues with a hybrid model for our audiences. So we've already proven that we can get the orchestra together safely. We had our Beethoven 4th concert last month. We've prepared now our all Baroque instrumental Christmas program, which is airing on December 19th. So on the 20th of January, our plan is, December 20th, later in January, our plan is to come back with a socially distanced audience and also the virtual streaming model for those who aren't ready to come. Now, this will all depend, of course, on where we are in the county. But, Clues used to be the home for the Chamber Orchestra many years ago. And we all know how enormous that hall is. We're confident that we can get 200 people safely in pods, all around space with no intermission in the program. So you come in, sit down, live music. And we're hearing from so many people that they're ready for that they're just hungry for the communal experience of hearing live music. And, you can get the best recording equipment, but if people are listening to your broadcast from their phone, it's going to sound dreadful anyways. And who's got, multi-$1,000 stereo equipment where they can really listen? And even then, it doesn't replace the live experience. So our hope is to come back for the second 2/3 of our concert season. And a lot of it's been changed to reduce the orchestra so that we can continue to safely space them out. But our 21-22 season is already planned and ready to go. And a lot of it are just the rescheduled dates. We had 2 commissions in particular that kept getting pushed back. So everything has just gotten moved into 21-22. And even if we have to socially distance the orchestra and the audience, we can do that because our core is 35 musicians. I don't think you're going to be hearing Mahler or Shostakovich in the 21-22 season. I hope the vaccine does what it's supposed to do, and people life can get back to normal. But we're prepared to continue with what we're doing now, even into next season.
I'm really glad to hear that, and I think a lot of people will be very glad to hear that too. So, yeah, getting the brand out there. Unless you just market yourself like crazy, and spend all kinds of money. But I find it, well, a little bit sad that, that the ICO has struggled with that. Of course, I'm aware of it, and I know all the musicians are aware of the ICO. But and you've got a good core patronage, I would imagine.
Very much.
And I know you guys do the educational programming, so there's no reason you shouldn't be better well known. But well, that's maybe a conversation for a different time. And I'm thinking I may just edit that last little bit out of there. But yeah, so well, this has been great. I've subbed in the ICO, and I can't remember who was conducting. It wasn't the previous conductor, although I have played under his baton. He was a guest conductor in Muncie. Oh, wait a minute. He used to conduct Muncie Symphony as well. Kirk Trevor.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So he was up there as well. But well, I forget where I was headed with it. Oh, Marion Philharmonic. Right now, you've got you mentioned a couple of other groups. Is Arkansas one of those that you mentioned?
No, just a guest conductor there. I've been music director of the Butler County Symphony in Pennsylvania for 9 years now, and that's just outside of Pittsburgh. regional orchestra, about the same budget size as Muncie, and a great group. And I've been so happy there because I really felt like I came in at just the right time to help that organization get to where it needed to be. And it's it celebrated its 75th anniversary a few years ago, and that is a real music loving community with a lot of history there. And so I've appreciated that. It takes about 7 weeks out of my calendar. And then Marion, I joined about this is my third season there, although nothing started, the right way. Obviously, the first season was reduced anyways in size, and then COVID hits after the second concert of the second season. So that it's really taken a while to get roots planted in Marion effectively. But we are returning to concerts in the spring is the plan. We have an obstacle with just venues there and not being able to get into venues. But we're optimistic that we'll be able to move the majority of our season and just compress it into the spring months.
Good. I'm always amazed. And so many of the musicians travel from one regional group to another, and in fact, I'm thinking, I don't know why we don't just take charter buses from one weekend to the next, right? So many of the musicians are the same. But Marion, I've been part of some spectacular performances up there, and the audience is so appreciative. And I'm thinking, the previous music director, Alex, used to refer to it as the gem of, what county is it? Gem of, and I think it is. It's something very special in that community, and I really hope that orchestra can grow. I think you've got Fort Wayne so close, but if you've got somebody in Marion, the opportunity to hear great music in Marion, how much better is that? So
that's right. And to your point, a lot of the musicians, are shared among so many of these orchestras, including Fort Wayne. If it's an off week in their calendar, they're down playing as well. And I think that this is, to the point that there's something, and I knew this coming from Richmond, Indiana, and I was principal second, with my hometown orchestra for 2 seasons while I was a Butler student. The source of civic pride of having the city's name attached to your orchestra, and here, this small little Midwestern town has an orchestra that plays 6 concerts, I think that that's something, that really seriously should be taken into consideration here, with leaders in the community when they're deciding how much funding goes where. With my orchestra in Butler, for example, it's a very small town, but was much, much larger at another time. They were written up in Smithsonian as one of the small towns out west, in Pennsylvania. But one of the things that they listed is that they had a professional orchestra. So there is something, that I think people look at and say, hey, we might be a small town, but look at the things that we have to offer here that we don't have to drive to Indianapolis or Dayton, Ohio, or Fort Wayne to hear. And I think that that's a lot of smart people in these small towns have kept these orchestras going for that reason, for the cultural enhancement, the quality of life that we impart, with our presence there.
Well, I'm hoping that regardless of the size of group and the town, I'm hoping we can all rebound from what's happened here. So, Matthew, thanks for the time on this and for sharing everything. Like I tell everybody I interview, I knew very little about you, and now I know a lot about you, which is great. That's kind of the whole point of this. And I look forward to hearing your groups play and hopefully being part of some of those performances. But so we'll end it there.
Thank you, Larry. It was great connecting with you. It's been great working with you here, and I just hope that we get back to some kind of steady, structure in our concert schedules here. So
right. So, well, thank you. Stay healthy, please.
You do the same, and all the best to your family. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks so much. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.